Hello, my name is Cynthia. I'm the editor of The Change Agent, and today I'm going to share with you some teaching tips related to issue number 55, just published in February 2022. This issue has a really strong focus on writing, as well as reading and some math, and an overall focus on the way work has changed. It was already changing anyway before the pandemic, but the pandemic really accelerated some changes, and we wanted to lift up student stories of how they're adapting, retraining themselves, and remaking their work. So let me share with you the two parts. The first one focuses on retraining ourselves and remaking our work. And the second part focuses on writing for the change agent. And I gave the first part a lot of activities to accompany the articles that help students think about writing in order to prepare them precisely for the second part, where I hope students will use the call for articles to submit articles for the next series of issues that the change agent is publishing in the next school year. And I hope the writing here inspires them to write their own pieces. So let's look at part one. It starts with this lovely story by a woman who worked as a wedding planner. And she had her own business. And of course, when the pandemic hit, that changed everything. They had to adapt everything about their business. Many weddings were postponed. Some people had them, but under very different conditions. And she writes about all the adapting that they did to make it work and all the hustling that she did to keep her business afloat. And I don't know if you can see behind the mask here, but not only is she a wedding planner, she also was a bride during the pandemic. And that's kind of a nice surprise that you get at the end of the story, where she says, yes, not only am I a wedding planner, but I'm also a pandemic bride. And so I love that little surprise ending. It's something for students to reflect on, what makes a piece of writing engaging? Is it nice to have a surprise like that at the end? Just to reflect critically on what they're reading. And I give you some more handholds here for teaching about writing, including taking apart some vocabulary, learning about how suffixes can be used to make new words, studying the punctuation, especially in this case, the use of em dashes. So students can read this. And what I like to do is ask them to go hunting for instances of em dashes in the text, and then try to explain how they're being used. In other words, almost write your own rule for how to use an em dash. And I feel like that really helps teach the grammar, and it helps it stick. And it would be nice if students then could try writing their own sentences using em dashes. And then there's a writing practice there at the end. The next article is called Clean Start, and it's by a woman who used to be a restaurant worker, but she lost her job during the pandemic. And so she was, out of money, needing to feed her family. And as she says in the article, I always find a way, I always land on my feet. And I love that metaphor. And one of the post-reading activities is for students to think about, what does that mean to land on your feet as a metaphor? What does she mean by that? So she starts her own cleaning business, and she writes here about what that was like. And it's very touching, honestly. It's a very touching article. I think students are going to really love it. There's a lot of post-reading activities for people to think about the metaphors that she uses, how she kind of does a lot of weighing of good things and bad things about having your own business. And then there's a writing opportunity for students to share something in their life that had a good side and a bad side, and to incorporate the phrases on the one hand and on the other hand. Then there's an interview with the author, just getting a little bit more granular about how she actually ran this business, asking questions like, well, how much did you charge? And how did you decide how much to charge? And what was the hardest part of doing this work? And, just things like that, because I think the nitty gritty is fascinating. And then just to create a math activity out of that, I created this kind of fictional schedule of hers, and created this opportunity for students to calculate how much she earned in a day, based, because you can read the chart, you can see how many hours she worked and what rate she was earning during those hours. And so you can calculate how much she made in a day, what the hourly rate turned out to be, and you can add it all up and find out how much she made in a week. So, and I put the answer sheet online. I'll show you where it is on the issues 55 section of the website. There's an answer sheet. Okay, next we have an article by Luz Maria Hernandez talking about how she works at a cleaning cooperative. It's called We Can Do It. And I love this piece. It's actually a reprint from an older issue of the Change Agent. But she talks about what it's like working in a women's cooperative. So a different model from Zulma's in the previous article, a different model than having your own business. This is a cooperative business. And interestingly, I found some research that talked about how cooperatives actually did very well during the pandemic. You know, they had enough cushion to support their workers through the pandemic. So I have some more information about cooperatives here. Then we move on to this article by Karen Mudry. She talks about how she lost her job during the pandemic. When she was trying to reapply, she noticed that everybody required her to have a high school diploma or equivalency, and she didn't have one. And I love her honesty here. You can see in the pullout quote when she says, should I lie and hope they wouldn't notice, you know, on her resume? Or should I tell the truth and never get an interview? And she says, I decided to lie. And I just think that that's a really sincere kind of expression of what people are up against. She's been in the workforce for decades. She's done her job beautifully, but she did not have that credential. And how should she manage that situation? Turns out what she did was she kind of took advantage of this pandemic period when she was out of work to go back to school and get her GED. And then I have another article that I can point you to, another change agent writer who was in a very similar situation, going back late in life to get her GED. There's lots of vocabulary in here. I mentioned that, you know, I'm really trying to support students as writers. And so I'm trying to lift up the ways that students express themselves. And she uses some of this vocabulary like short-lived and newfound and full-fledged. And I just love these hyphenated phrases. I think it's a great educational opportunity for students to think about how those phrases work. It's also a great opportunity to learn some new words, like, for example, the word fledgling. And if you know what a fledgling is, it's easier to think about what full-fledged means. The next article is about a woman who has a disability. She lost her job during the pandemic. She tried to get the right accommodations to be able to go back in person, but she couldn't get those. She tried to find online work, but noticed that there was a lot of sketchy stuff out there. And so she writes about the dilemma that she faced over and over again looking for online work. She also talks about what it's like to apply for a disability, and I created a box for students to go explore themselves this Social Security Administration link around how to apply for disability benefits. So even if nobody in your class is actually thinking about doing that, they might know somebody who needs to, or they might have a family member who it would be advantageous for them to know about this. And it's just worth exploring a hard document online, right? Looking at, you know, clicking on that link and seeing what's required and just interpreting and investigating and gaining some familiarity with what that would be like navigating a government website. So in the after you read activities, I ask people to maybe share a story of when they've had a sketchy job offer and what happened. And so, of course, any of these opportunities are also more writing opportunities for people to write, not just tell their story, although telling it is also a great practice, but maybe write their story. Here we have a repeat change agent writer. She was also in a previous issue of the Change Agent. I think it was our mental health issue. She wrote about starting a book club. And here she writes about how volunteers make a difference. And she works as a tax volunteer. She supports people to get their taxes done. The pandemic, of course, shut down all the in-person work there, but they moved online, and she figured out how to support people online to get their taxes done. And she is the recipient of volunteer help in her ESL tutoring that she gets to take advantage of. So it's a wonderful story, and she's a great writer. She uses lots of figurative language, lots of great vocabulary. And there's a big box there at the end where I'm offering students the chance to study her writing. And I really encourage teachers to take your time with students to really take apart this essay and just investigate, how does she do what she does in this essay? And I offer 5 points there for how you can try to notice things like the sequencing, and find her figurative language and think about what it means, and notice how she spreads her figurative language across paragraphs even, and how does that work for you as a reader? And I just want people to investigate and think about the writing. Again, hoping that it inspires students to try it themselves. Okay, now we have a student writing about how she lost her job as a PCA, a personal care attendant, during the pandemic, and how she couldn't work in person due to health concerns. She started also training herself in an online course on how to be a financial consultant. There's a little box there with Psalm 23 because she quotes from this Psalm, and she talks about how during the worst of the pandemic, she felt like she was in the valley of the shadow of death. And so I just thought, well, that's a beautiful verse from the Bible and also from the Torah. Let's quote it and give students a chance to explore that poetic language. It's also maybe very familiar to some students, so that familiarity might provide some scaffolding for working with a kind of slightly harder text. So then we move on to a piece by my colleague at World Education, Judy Mortrude. She writes about how, since everything is going digital, right? And a lot of our home life, school life, even work life is going digital. And there is a new law and a new program that tries to address digital equity. It reduces the cost of internet access as well as the cost of devices. And so she writes about this. It's a fairly high level text, so I adapted it to be a more low level text. And I added more images to be able to give students something to think about the difference between equality and equity. And this also has an opportunity for students to write and participate in a civic way around what their state plan will be to address digital equity. And so that's what this box is about. Okay, our last article in this section is by my other World Education colleague, Sandy Goodman, and it's about transferable skills, because we wanted to end on a high note that students really have lots of skills, and they might not always even recognize them as skills. For example, Zulma in the picture down there at the bottom, she's our student who lost her restaurant job and started her own cleaning business. So what are the skills she used to be able to do that? She wasn't just cleaning, it wasn't just her ability to mop or vacuum or scrub a sink. It was her communication skills, her ability to reach out to her contacts, her ability to keep track of her time, to charge appropriately, to investigate, learn, research what the proper prices are for this kind of work. All kinds of skills, people skills, visiting job sites, assessing, how much to charge. So many skills that she had to use to make her business a success. And so Sandy starts by looking at the transferable skills that Zulma showed, and goes on to talk about, the importance of students being able to identify their transferable skills. And a nice chart here that also creates a writing opportunity. Students could take notes on this page where they could write down a time in their life when they've used this transferable skill. So they could start to get a sense for themselves of how many skills they use in their daily life, not just at work. And also, I want you to know that since I know that it can be sometimes hard to work with those PDFs, in issue 55 here, under extras, I created a worksheet, and it's available in Word. And I put it in Word because I wanted you to be able to adapt it for your own use. And it's very similar to the chart that you see there in the magazine. It's got a little bit more information. It's got the name of the skill, and it's got an example of that skill. And then it's got this invitation for the student to write their own time when they've used that skill. Since it's a Word doc, it's flexible. A student can write as many lines as they want in this. So that is part one of the change agent. Part two is all about writing for the change agent. And our new call for articles is out. The theme is immigrants and immigration. We're going to publish the content that we get in 3 different issues, which will be published in the school year of 2022-23. I created a little Q&A here, a very accessible, easy to read Q&A about what it means to write for the change agent. What is the change agent? Who writes for it and who reads it? Okay, so this might be a good way to get started with your students, is have them look at this Q&A. Then there comes the actual call for articles. So these are the writing prompts that I put together that I want students to respond to. They can respond to any one of all of these prompts. You can see them under 3 different headings: creating community, access and advocacy, and your story matters. That is a lot of text. And so I made it also a slightly more accessible version of the call for articles. If you don't want to bring in so much text, this is a little shorter, a little more accessible. If even this feels like a lot for your beginners, what you can do is just pick, 1 or 2 questions and present them to your students in whatever style you think would work best. I do encourage you to go ahead and share this page, because I do think that it's helpful to be confronted with a seemingly hard document, a wall of text, and maybe a feeling of like, oh, that looks too hard for me, but then to take your time and notice that you can understand a few of the questions. And then you could just respond to those questions. And then that way you've kind of tackled a hard document. Okay, that's my introduction to issue 55. I hope you enjoy reading it and working on it with your students, and I hope to hear from you about it if you have any feedback.